What makes a great podcast is a great podcast host with the ability to entertain, to educate, and connect with their audience. You can have the most expensive equipment, the most talented production team, but if you don't have it together as a podcast host, it's going to be very hard for you to grow your audience. So in this video, I'll share with you what not to do as a podcast host. I'll give you examples of amazing podcast hosts who are killing it with their shows and the specific things they do that make them great. And as a bonus, I connected with some of my friends who happen to be leaders in the podcast space who will share with you their advice on how to become a great podcast host. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hey there, welcome to Pod Sound School. I'm Veronica and I'm the content marketing director and instructor inside of our coaching programs. We post videos about podcast strategy, production, and marketing. If this is something that you're interested in, take a minute to subscribe. And if you're a business owner and you're curious to know how a podcast can help you grow your business, I have a mini course called Idea to Podcast Simplify. To access the mini course for free, you can go to podcastingsmart.com or find the link in the description below. To be a great podcast host, you need to be aware of what podcast listeners like and dislike. And how do we get this information? Well, I'm going to give it to you right here. A couple of years ago, we made a video about the things that podcast listeners find most annoying about podcast hosts. We went into public forums, asked our audience, and published all of our findings in this video. And since then, the video has gotten thousands of views and comments from people sharing their opinions about what not to do as a podcast host. So are you ready? Here's the list. And it's a long one. Interrupting guests, rambling and lack of focus, overly scripted or robotic delivery, excessive self-promotion, poor preparation, monotonous voice, lack of listener engagement, unnecessary filler words, ghosting your audience. And if you've done some of those in your podcast, and no shame whatsoever, I have done a few myself. The whole point of this is to learn what people like and dislike so you can become better at being a podcast host. So now that we know what we're not supposed to do, let's see what are the traits that every amazing podcast host must have. And the first one is the ability to execute and embrace imperfection. One of the podcasts I listen to every week religiously is the Huberman Lab with Andrew Huberman. And you're probably familiar with the show because it is in the top podcast charts. And Andrew Huberman has become a celebrity, been interviewed on The Tonight Show and having dinner with Brian Johnson and the Kardashians. So he's become a celebrity. But did he have it together when he started his podcast 3 years ago? No. If you watched his first episodes, he was reading from a teleprompter or reading his notes from his laptop. He didn't have the best lighting or the most professional backdrop, but none of that stopped him from starting the Huberman Lab. So the lesson here is to become a great podcast host, you must let go of having everything perfect and focus on getting it done. Execution is what's going to bring you closer to the level of confidence and production quality you want to achieve. You can watch or listen to all of the podcast episodes you want and take all of the courses about how to podcast, but it won't be until you get your ass in front of the camera and start speaking into that microphone, even if it doesn't come out perfect, that you'll learn how to be a great podcast host. And here's my logic. In order to be a great podcast host, you have to be a podcast host first. And if you don't start recording, then you won't be a podcast host, and then you'll never be great. And if you're already recording, good for you. It may not be perfect, but at least you're doing it and learning. And this isn't only for you, this is for me too. Now I'll be reminding myself that execution is the ticket to becoming better at hosting my show. Another trait that makes podcast hosts magnets, attract a massive audience, is authenticity. Showing up as yourself, truly and unapologetically, and embracing all parts of you while letting people decide whether they like you or not, and being okay with people not liking you. I struggle with authenticity mainly because I want people to like me, and I feel like if I show up not having my shit together, then I will be judged. And I'm curious to know if this is something that you struggle with when you're recording your content. Let me know in the comments. And this may not be a good example of authenticity, but Bobby Althoff, the host of the Really Good podcast, does the complete opposite of what I would do in a podcast interview. In a podcast interview, I'm overly worried about my guests and I want to make them feel like they're valuable and important. And I want them to know that I have done my homework, that I have done the research. But Bobby is the complete opposite. The things she does make me cringe. During one of her interviews with the famous rapper Drake.
Today I'm here with, can you introduce yourself?
Drake.
She asked the most awkward questions, appeared completely disinterested, and acted like she did not know or care about Drake at all, which was pretty hilarious. And yes, she has built her career as an influencer from the ground up, creating TikToks using deadpan humor and intentionally making her audience uncomfortable. And some people may argue that it's not much about her being authentic, but a calculated marketing strategy to give her the fame she's accumulated in only 3 years. So how do we show up authentically for our audiences in a society that values authenticity? In the words of Brené Brown, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are at the moment. Let's all collectively work on stopping trying to be someone else who in our eyes is better than us and lean more into who we are. Another important quality of a great podcast host is his ability or her ability to connect with others through empathy, storytelling, active listening, and genuine curiosity. And for this example, I'm bringing one of my favorite podcasters, Stephen Bartlett. Stephen Bartlett, the host of the Diary of a CEO podcast, does this pretty well. I remember one episode where he was interviewing this hardcore divorce attorney from New York, a very eloquent, matter-of-fact, tough personality, someone you wouldn't think would cry easily in a podcast episode. And towards the end, Stephen asked him to define love and loss. His guest shares the most beautiful definition of love and loss while getting choked up and fighting back tears. I get emotional. I'm sure everybody there was emotional too. Stephen's emotional intelligence and ability to empathize with his guest create a genuine connection, making for compelling, heartfelt interviews that get you right in the feels. He's also a master at storytelling. He knows his audience, does his research, and shows up in each episode fully present and interested in his guest's personal stories. So how do you connect with your audience? And this goes back to authenticity. The only way to connect with your guest and with your audience is by showing yourself as a human being. You don't have to pretend you know everything. You don't have to pretend to be anybody else. You're fully present, knowing and trusting yourself and what you know, and then you press record. Another quality of a great podcast host is their ability to pitch new concepts and ideas to get you pumped and excited to watch or listen to the entire episode. A good example of this is Mel Robbins. The woman is a master at selling you her episodes and her guests. At the beginning of the episode, she starts with a personal story about the topic to help her audience connect with the topic.
Anywhere between 20 and 50% of Americans struggle with one of two difficulties, and that's either struggling to fall asleep or maintain sleep.
Then she starts the episode with phrases like, have you ever, or the other day, or do you struggle with? After presenting the problem with a personal story, she then introduces her guest, emphasizing that they are the world's authority on the topic and that they are there to provide the exact answers and solutions to the problem. Mel uses this formula for each episode without fail. She understands that on every episode, she has to pitch to her listeners so they stay and listen to the entire episode. Mel does not assume that people will listen to her podcast just because she's a well-known motivational speaker and she always brings in the best topics. She doesn't take her listeners for granted. So if Mel Robbins, with millions of downloads, uses this formula on each episode, why on earth do we assume that we're above this? I do this exercise with my clients all the time. I tell them, convince me to watch or listen to the episode in the first couple of minutes. We all need to be more like Mel and spend the first few minutes of the episode pitching to our audiences. Another personality trait that all great podcast hosts share is their relentless commitment to show up for their audience. I know that these people have big production teams working behind the scenes to make the show possible, but this is not an excuse for you not to show up consistently. And I'm telling this to myself too. We've been able to stay consistent with our content here on our channel, but not so much with our podcast. That's why we have over 90,000 subscribers and not so much to show for on our podcast. This is why I found a simple workflow that allows me to stay consistent without compromising the quality of the episodes, and you can do it too. By the way, if you don't know what podcast I'm talking about, we have a podcast called Content Jefe. I'm going to be the host for the second season. So if you want to follow me on that journey, make sure that you subscribe to the Content Jefe podcast. I'm going to leave the link in the description below. So what do? Look for ways to automate, outsource, and streamline your production so you too can accomplish your wildest goals and dreams with your show. Now, let's see what some of my podcast besties, and by the way, some of the best in the industry, have to say about what makes a great podcast host.
So what is a good podcast host? Well, it's somebody that's super, super passionate about their content. It's about somebody that's committed to showing up regardless of what might get in the way, because consistency is absolutely critical. It's somebody that's passionate about their content and really does their homework and prepares for each episode. And here's the kicker. So many times I see podcast hosts that are trying to mimic somebody else in the industry that they see are successful. That is not going to work. You need to be yourself. Be original, be you, and bring your energy, bring your excitement, bring your experiences and your stories to the forefront. And that will make you a good podcast host.
When I think about a podcast host, from hosting like so many different people, whether it's a solo episode or it's an interview, where I'm asking questions, the big piece that I always remember is, what does the audience care about? That's like the biggest thing, because I think everybody gets wrapped up in, I have to show how smart I am or how knowledgeable I am, or I can ask the best questions, or I can take what ChatGPT threw out to me and turn it into this like groundbreaking interview. And at the end of the day, if you just keep saying to yourself, does my audience care about this? Or what do they actually care about? It is what creates the best content. And I think about that too when I listen to episodes that I love, because I do this and, we're in this industry. I say, like, why do I love this so much? Why do I really enjoy it? And it's like, oh yeah, the host knows how to be genuinely interested in their guest and the subject that they're talking about, but they also know how it relates to me. They know me as a listener and what I'm interested in. So if you can just keep saying, what does my audience care about? Why is this important to them? And really address those things, then you're more likely to keep them engaged in your content.
Hey, how are you? Well, let me show you what I have going on here.
I think the most engaging podcast hosts are the ones who are legitimately interested in their guest to the point where they've done excess research. Mm-hmm. And a good example of this is Patrick Bet-David, right? So like this guy talks about how he has not interviewed Michael Jordan, but he's been preparing for that interview for over 8 years. And he has notes and notes and notes, knowing he might never get the opportunity, or not necessarily not knowing that, but like when he gets the opportunity, he'll be ready. So he stays ready so he doesn't have to get ready. So I think like that is by far and beyond like the biggest way to be an engaging host is to actually give a crap about your guest.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I hope you're taking notes. There are a lot of lessons I learned from 5 years of working in the podcast industry. If you're launching your podcast soon or want to get better at podcasting, in this video, I share very important lessons and strategies every podcast host and producer should know before getting started. Go watch it.